The one where Nico has 30 boyfriends. By A Million Stars. Read by My Lost and Found. Summary. Seriously? Me and Lester? Nico looked ready to kill him. If you keep speaking to me, I think I'm gonna throw up. Or, a new friend from college desperately tries to figure out who Nico's secret boyfriend is. He messes up. A lot. If only Nico didn't have so many weirdly close friends from high school. This fic is about 5,800 words and one chapter. This PODFIC is being recorded for Voice Team 2024 for the challenge Scavenger Hunt. As always, link to the fic is in the description, and on with the story. Nico D'Angelo was fucking scary. That was a pretty well-known fact across all of campus. The kid wore all black, eyeliner, allegedly, and Jess had sworn she saw a tattoo on his stomach when he raised his arms yawning once during English class. But yeah, Nico was the resident scary emo boy. He just walked around with headphones in, typing on his phone and constantly buttoning and unbuttoning the cuffs on his jacket during class, instead of actually taking notes like the rest of them. He was hot in a mysterious, terrifying way, and befriending him had become a borderline obsession. It had taken weeks for Mark to even figure out the kid's name, and even longer to get a word of conversation with Nico. Jess thought it was dumb. Everyone thought it was dumb. Maybe because Nico was, well, scary, and showed literally no interest in becoming friends with all of them. But his utter avoidance of interaction with the rest of them only made Mark more and more interested in becoming besties with Nico. He was just so fucking cool. His mysterious aura just made him even cooler. God, he wanted to hang out with him. Nico was sitting in the back row of their history class, doing something on his phone. Mark looked closer, like the creep that he was, and could tell Nico was texting someone. Despite definitely wanting to, he couldn't decipher the messages, but he could kind of read Nico's face. There were less hard, angry lines than before, and he was almost smiling. As soon as he saw Mark's eyes on him, he wiped the look off his face and closed his phone, raising his eyebrows. "What's up?" Nico asked monotonedly. And Mark did his best not to grin at the fact Nico sort of initiated their conversation. Not really, but still. He bounced on his feet, deciding to just bite the bullet. Small talk wasn't exactly his strong suit anyway. "Want to come grab lunch with me and my friends after class? We're going to the dining hall on the east side." He certainly spoke faster than was technically necessary for a human, but he was nervous. Sue him. Nico looked at him blankly. To be fair, they had never really spoken before, but it's not like Nico ever spoke to anyone, so it didn't really make Mark an outlier. "I can't," he said curtly. "I have lunch plans." Mark nodded and tried not to feel kind of hurt. It's not like Nico had to say yes, but it was kind of obvious that he was lying to avoid hanging out with them. "Coolio," Mark said awkwardly, shuffling on his feet. Nico's phone buzzed again. It was getting awkward quickly. As a last-ditch effort, he tried to look depressed enough to guilt Nico into coming along. God, he was going to get bullied for this later. He was really pulling out all the moves for this kid. It didn't work. He started to walk away, somewhat dejectedly, and he could hear Nico sigh. "Tomorrow." Nico finally relented, and while the tired tone wasn't exactly the excited reaction he was hoping for, it was something. Mark finger-gunned and internally cursed himself. That definitely looked stupid. He did not want Nico D'Angelo to think he was stupid. He cleared his throat, attempting to make a smooth recovery, but it didn't work. Nico raised a single eyebrow. God, he was so fucking cool. and looked almost amused. "You hang out with the girl in the red shirt over there, the one staring at us?" Nico asked, and stifling a groan, he turned, just to see Jess watching them intently. When she saw she was just caught, she ducked back behind her backpack, but it was too late. The damage was done. I'm sorry, Nico cut him off. "She's in my 10 o'clock lecture tomorrow. I assume she can escort me down to wherever you'll be." He was so cool and casual about it that Mark almost fainted. He felt a bit like a fanboy meeting their idol. Yeah, I'll meet you guys there." "Okay," he replied, and his phone buzzed again. Nico glanced down at it and almost laughed after reading it. He would have killed to know what it said. Nico glanced up at him again, then back at his phone, eyes pointed. Even his dumbass was able to tell it was a dismissal. "Well, I'll see you tomorrow," Mark said with another set of finger guns, which he internally cursed himself for again. He needed a new token hand gesture. "See you then," Nico said with a nod, and went back to texting. Mark stood there awkwardly for a second, before dismissing himself. "I fucking told you he would say yes!" he yelled to Jess, who was still bright red. She shook her head. "I don't see him eating with us now, do you?" she asked sarcastically, and he refused to let her get him off his victory high. "We're hanging out with him tomorrow, so fuck you," he declared, and she rolled her eyes, laughing slightly. He grinned. "In fact, you and him will have to have a one-on-one conversation after class tomorrow, so have fun with that, you nerd." "You're such a dick, Mark. I hope he makes fun of you." He grabs his bag off the floor. "Tie," he said, flipping her off. She laughed and blundered after him as he made his way out. Admittedly, he was kind of distracted. He maintained that the entire disaster was not his fault. It was an easy mistake to make. Mark had been walking back from class, listening to a podcast and generally just having a good time. It had been a few days since his first interaction with Nico, and the lunch had gone better than he hoped. Nico had mostly stayed silent, occasionally chiming into the conversation with Jessica, but there was enough that it could be a victory. During said conversation, he had gotten a phone call and stepped away to pick it up. Not a big deal, but he had answered the call by saying, "Hey, babe," in his usual gruff voice. It happened so quickly, Mark had barely flagged it as important. It just answered the question of who Nico was constantly texting. He wondered if maybe he knew Nico's girlfriend from around campus, and had done some brief online stalking to try to find out who it was, with little success. So, seeing him sitting outside a cafe, smiling and laughing with a pretty girl, wasn't really a difficult situation to analyze. Nico, chilling on a date with his girlfriend. They were really cute together. Really cute. His girlfriend looked a little younger than Nico, maybe by a year or two. She was one of those people with a kind face, curly black hair pushed out of her eyes with a headband, and a cutesy outfit. Nico looked more relaxed around her than he had ever seen the kid before. The idea of her and Nico, angsty, skinny, emo Nico, together was odd, but really cute. One of those unlikely couple things. He kind of loved it. They were deep in discussion, and Mark found himself creeping closer and closer, trying to hear what they were talking about. They were discussing some kid named Frank, who must have had a pet dog or something, or was possibly a furry. It was a really confusing conversation. Because Mark was a total genius, he forgot that other people had eyes and noticed things, and standing about 6 feet away from someone just staring at them wasn't exactly subtle. He, of course, only realized this extremely important fact when the girl turned to him and asked if he was okay. The worst part is, she seemed genuinely concerned about his well-being. Nico just looked annoyed. "He's fine," Nico snapped. "Just a friend from school." He did his best to contain his excitement about the fact Nico had just referred to him as a friend. Hell yeah, they were friends. He was friends with Nico fucking Angelo. The look of excitement in his eyes was definitely making him look like a stalker, so he tried to alleviate the awkwardness. "I'm Mark. Nice to meet you." He trailed off kind of awkwardly, but she smiled kindly. "Hazel." She introduced herself with a smile, then turned over to Nico, grinning cheekily. "And this is the first I'm hearing about you having friends, Nico. Very exciting." "I don't have friends," Nico said sullenly, but there was a smile in his eyes. Hazel shook her head, smiling. "Whatever you say, Ghost King," she said with a flourish, and Mark didn't even have the mental ability to start figuring out that nickname. "Shut up," Nico said gruffly, hitting her but still looking amused. Hazel really must have been someone special if she could make him laugh like that. He suddenly was aware of the fact that he was completely intruding on a romantic lunch. Nico was looking at him kind of oddly, almost urging him to get out. He backed away awkwardly, attempting to make a smooth exit. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your date. I'll see you around, Nico." "Date?" Nico interrupted. Mark nodded, slightly confused. Hazel bursting out laughing, and Nico turning bright red. He looked so embarrassed that Mark almost felt bad, except he couldn't figure out what he was actually supposed to feel bad for. Hazel was the one who composed herself first. "We're not dating," she said, almost breathless. "He's my brother." "Brother? But that couldn't be right because..." Nico noticed the confusion in his eyes. "Half-brother, technically." It was so awkward. So awkward. He guessed it was his fault for assuming they weren't related just because they looked completely different, or just assuming that a boy and a girl hanging out meant they had to be dating. "Oh, I am so sorry," he said somewhat awkwardly. He wasn't really sure if this was his moment to back out, but it felt appropriate to have them say something forgiving him, or telling him to get out of their lives forever. Either worked. It appeared his first choice was correct. "It's fine. Easy mistake to make. We look nothing alike," Hazel said kindly. It was true. Not that he would have said anything. He may be dumb, but not that dumb. At least, the two of them seemed to think it was funny. Apparently, Nico had been talking for some time through Mark's sad inner monologue. "Besides, even if we weren't related, I would never date Hazel. She's annoying," Nico said, more to Hazel than Mark. It was now extremely clear these were sibling interactions. "How dare you?" she said incredulously, barely holding in a laugh. "I'm a total catch. You're just gay." Nico shook his head, amused. "Having a boyfriend does affect a romantic relationship as brother and sister," he deadpanned, and Hazel laughed, clear and bright. He glanced over to Mark quickly, as if to check his reaction to Nico's very nonchalant coming out moment. Mark didn't care, obviously. He was just mad that all of his investigative journalism on every girl Nico had ever spoken to was going to waste. That would not stop him, though. This just meant he had to go back to online stalking him. That wasn't a problem. He would find Nico's mysterious boy if it was the last thing he did. It happened again. "Get the fuck out," Nico said suddenly, and Mark took a double take. The two of them had been walking back to Nico's dorm, talking about literally nothing, until all of a sudden, cool Nico turned into scary Nico. He followed Nico's glare to a Latino boy leaning against the brick wall of the dorm, bouncing on his feet slightly and tapping away on his phone. Probably Candy Crush, the bastard. The boy's eyes lit up when he noticed Nico standing in front of him. "Nico!" he called excitedly, and Nico blinked slowly, seemingly angry at the boy. "Why are you here?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Scary Nico was weirdly attractive. He forced himself to get rid of that thought before his mind could get out of control. The boy gave him a cheeky grin. That was somehow super attractive too. Damn him. "I go here, stupid." "No, you don't." Nico's voice was steady, and he stepped closer to the other boy. "I go here. All you do is annoy me." The kid took a step closer to Nico until they were uncomfortably close together. Talk to Chiron and finessed the system, baby. Benefits of being a literal genius. He paused and grinned mischievously. "Can I sleep in your room?" "You're disgusting, Leo." They were doing some weird staring contest, and it was so intense and frankly odd that it took Mark a second to realize what was going on. This was the boyfriend. Obviously. There was certainly a little more animosity than he expected, but overall, Leo was pretty much what he was expecting. He was kind of badass looking in a weird way, had a whole heavy metal mechanic vibe going on, and there was definitely sexual tension in their arguing. A lot of it. He was exactly the type of guy that he imagined for Nico, vaguely scary and kind of hot. It made way more sense than Hazel did. Of course Nico would be dating someone kind of cool and alt. Not that there was anything wrong with Hazel, but she was a real-life horse girl. A hot mechanic made a lot more sense. He was mad at himself that he hadn't thought of that before. "Hi," he finally said, uncomfortable in the silence. They both froze, practically jumping apart. He definitely made it uncomfortable. That was kind of a reoccurring theme in his life. Nico sighed and threw his arms out. "Leo, meet Mark. Mark, Leo." Mark waved at him awkwardly, and Leo bounced on his feet. "Nico, I didn't know you had any friends." "Fuck off," Nico said at the same time Mark muttered. "Why does everyone keep saying that?" Leo grinned widely. His eyes sparkled in the dark, like he was exuberating some kind of warmth. "I kid." Nico rolled his eyes. "We all know Nico's one of the boys." He pronounced boys with a Z. Nico looked absolutely done with the conversation. "Okay, now that you've harassed me, can you please leave the premises? I think you're freaking out, Mark." It was an obvious excuse to stop Mark from spending time with his boyfriend, which made sense. Mark was weirdly obsessed and would definitely say something regrettable the longer they spent time together. That wasn't going to stop him. He put his hands up in protest. "It's okay. I'm not freaked out." It wasn't entirely true. The conversation hadn't gone exactly like he'd envisioned. Nico and Leo weren't exactly bantering. It was more like arguing with a layer of affection underneath. But hey, he wasn't one to judge. It wasn't like he was in a relationship. If it worked, it worked. "See, Nico, your other best friend loves me." He had a shit-eating grin, which was a stark contrast to the look of absolute disdain on Nico's face. Again, it wasn't exactly typical for a relationship, but still. Nico was infamously scary. Maybe that translated into his dating life, too. They stood in silence for a minute, Nico glowering and Leo grinning widely. Mark took that as his cue to start talking. "So, how did you two get together?" Nico got bright red, but still maintained his glare at him. "Stop thinking that. We're not together. I would rather die." "Oh," Mark said awkwardly, and Leo gasped loudly. "How dare you?" he announced dramatically, putting his hand on his heart. "I thought we had something beautiful. I loved you." He wiped away a fake tear and looked like he was only ramping up the performance. It looked like Nico wanted to send him into an early grave. "I'll beat the shit out of you, Leo." "What about the children?" Leo said dramatically, his voice shaking. He fell to his knees, really giving his all to the performance. Mark was still putting the pieces together. He had obviously gotten the relationship wrong. Very wrong. There was no way Nico was dating this kid. Even though Leo was super fucking hot. Like, seriously hot. It didn't answer the question of who the hell this guy was. It wasn't like Nico hung out with a ton of people besides them, and they were clearly familiar with each other. Maybe not friends, but definitely familiar. Definitely affectionate. Just very deep down. Nico took an additional step away from Leo, who was struggling back to his feet. "We know each other from summer camp." "And high school," Leo added with a grin, his voice light and airy. Nico looked at him, slightly annoyed. "And high school," he confirmed, but didn't look 100% certain about that. Mark just decided to move on. He figured the best way to exit this situation was just to apologize and get out. He felt kind of bad intruding on some conversation with an old friend who showed up. Well, maybe not a friend. An old person that Nico knew might be more accurate. "Anyway, I'm sorry," Mark finally said. "I didn't mean to assume anything." Nico looked at him as if to say, "Really?" And Mark restrained himself from an eye roll. He didn't mean to assume anything. He just really wanted to know who Nico was dating. Like, really wanted to know. Leo slicked his hand through his hair. Nico could only be so lucky. Nico stared up at him and down, clearly judging him. "Think what you need to get through the day," he said, so bitingly that Mark snorted before covering his mouth embarrassed. Mark took a step back, inching his way towards his dorm entrance. "You swear you're not dating?" Leo gave a shit-eating grin. "Nope, just best friends." "We're not best friends." "We're totally best friends." "I don't like you. You just keep fucking showing up wherever I do." "Ouch." "Just shut the fuck up." Mark took that as his cue to flee. So apparently Leo wasn't the mystery boy. He would find him if it killed him. Mark looked at them suspiciously. "Are you sure you're not dating?" Nico was lying on the green next to a boy who somewhat resembled a puppy. A really buff puppy. Maybe that was Nico's type, considering his other guesses had been pretty off. Besides, they look super cute together. Comfortable, like the same level of comfortable that Nico was with his sister, which had to mean something. Unless they were also siblings, which would actually kill him. Because he had gotten pretty much the same look of disgust that he had gotten when he accused Nico and Hazel of dating. "We're not dating," Nico said resolutely. "We will never be dating." In fact, he had physically moved away from the kid, who looked kind of bummed out at Nico's rejection. "Frank's dating my sister." "Oh, well, at least that was better than when he guessed his actual sister." Frank looked kind of hurt still, and finally spoke up, albeit quietly. "Also, we're friends." Nico rolled his eyes. "Yes, we're also friends." The kid perked up at that little bit. "But we're definitely not boyfriends." Frank nodded in affirmation, before regarding Mark a little closer. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Not important," Mark said quickly, and walked away at almost a run. This was getting embarrassing. Nico stared at him incredulously. "Me and Grover are not dating. Absolutely not." "Okay, sorry." The boy to Nico's right grinned widely. I don't know about Connor, but I'm down for a throuple. Nico blinked, slowly. We're not together. Shut the fuck up, Travis. So, that's no to the throuple? Nico got up and walked away. So, apparently, not dating. Or down for a throuple. Me and Lester? Nico looked ready to kill him. If you keep speaking to me, I think I'm gonna throw up. He didn't blame himself. Stupid skater boys. So, you're not dating? Mark asked, slightly confused, because they said they weren't dating, but they were still kind of acting like they were dating. Nico cracked a smile over at Percy. No, he's not my type. Percy sighed. Yeah, whatever, asshole. He spun in his wheelie chair once. This joke is so overused at this point. Come up with another deeply depressing backstory, and we'll work from there. Nico looked at him incredulously. I'll work on it. Mark hadn't heard the deeply depressing backstory, and to be honest, he was extremely curious. But snooping on that was a little invasive, even for him. He opted to continue his current strategy, figuring out who the hell Nico D'Angelo was dating. So, what is your type? Blonde and stupid. Blonde and not an asshole like you are. Blonde and not an asshole. He could find that guy. 2 months later, and Mark still hadn't met the mysterious boyfriend. However, he and Nico had gotten closer, and they would actually do things like eat together and hang out. It was wild. He had learned a lot of things about Nico. He learned that he had a sister who died when he was a kid. He learned that he grew up in Venice. He learned that he had gone to some weird, ultra-reclusive boarding school in New York through all of high school. The high school part was really confusing every time Nico tried to explain it, but Mark just went with it. He wasn't about to question their budding relationship. Even so, Nico refused to tell him his boyfriend's name, or even show him a picture. He knew it was because Nico thought his obsessive curiosity was hilarious, and Mark knew the only way he would ever find out was stumbling on them. Luckily, the campus was pretty small, and there weren't that many people who Nico hung out with. There were 2 kids that he both called Stole, who he had apparently gone to high school with. The story of Nico's high school experience was very confusing. His sister, the hyperactive engineering student called Leo, Percy and his girlfriend Annabeth, who came to visit, and visited a lot, and that was just about it. So anyone else that Nico hung out with was fair game. It wasn't like he was just going to randomly approach Nico every time he was with someone. Not again. It was embarrassing enough the first few times. Now, he had enough information to make an educated guess and not humiliate himself. To be fair, that information was mostly the fact that he was looking for a blonde, nice-looking dude. But that was pretty good. So when he saw Nico sitting on the green, laughing with a blonde-haired kid who somewhat resembled Superman, he knew he had struck gold. There was no way this wasn't the guy. He got a little closer, hiding slightly behind a tree. Yes, he was aware it was creepy. No, he did not care. On closer inspection, he recognized the kid. He had seen him on Nico's lock screen a second before he hid it from view. That all of confirmed it. That stupid, he overheard the blonde boy say. I barely even passed my driver's test, and you want me to take you in Lester's car? He had met Lester before, but there was no way that kid owned a car. But who knows? Clearly, he wasn't as perceptive as he thought he was. He couldn't believe Nico had never mentioned Superman before. Maybe another kid from their weird high school? Cruise control, dude, Nico said, trying to be convincing.
There's like a 99% chance that we'll survive it. And Lester's totally gonna be down. He owes me several hundred favors.
Nico thought for a second.
Also, he doesn't care about anything anymore.
Blonde boy shook his head.
I backed into Mr. D the only time I ever tried to drive in camp. Do you know how many threats I got for that one?
Mark repressed the urge to go over and talk to the blonde boy and investigate further. They clearly knew each other well, and Nico seemed just as at ease around him as he did Hazel. Big evidence in his favor.
Please, Jason.
Nico paused and put on a sad, wistful look.
Riding in that car was my last memory with Bianca.
The blonde boy, Jason apparently, rolled his eyes.
Stop playing the dead sister card. It's not working again. Not after I did your math homework for you because it was her favorite subject and it was too painful to handle,
he said, using air quotes.
Nico grinned. I still can't believe you actually did calculus for me. This is why I'm not letting you test drive Lester's chariot with me. Literally die. Okay, Death Boy.
Nico groaned.
I know you're having a weird crisis and traveling around the world trying to find yourself right now, but can you hurry it up and come here? It's getting weird.
Jason rolled his eyes, and Nico groaned.
Stop it with the midlife crisis shit. You're supposed to be the stable one. I'm the angsty teen. Well, I'm definitely past the middle of my life,
Jason countered, and Nico acted like he didn't hear him.
Piper might hate your guts, but she would totally put in one phone call and you're automatically in.
Jason glared at him.
She doesn't hate me.
Nico raised his eyebrows, and Jason rolled his eyes.
I know from an outsider perspective, our relationship looks a little rocky, but we just haven't really talked since, well, you know.
They both paused, and Nico looked almost apologetic, but not really. Maybe Jason had dumped Piper for Nico. Maybe Piper was another sister? Who the fuck knows? Nico shook his head.
She could still totally admit you mid-semester.
Jason tilted his head.
Will you be my roomie? No,
Nico said saltily. Jason stared at him sadly, and Nico immediately caved.
Fine, only because you'll clean up after me. I'm not doing that. Yes, you are.
Mark became acutely aware of how deep into this he had gotten. He was hiding behind a tree, spying on his extremely private friend who was bantering with someone who almost was 100% his boyfriend. Jason checked off all the boxes. Blonde, didn't seem to be an asshole. That piece of advice from Percy was particularly useful. Clearly close with Nico, his picture was on his lock screen, and not his sibling. He had confirmed that Nico didn't have any brothers, because, holy shit, he could not take another awkward sibling sex talk. They were even touching, brushing against each other, fist bumping, Nico hitting him on the shoulder several times. Maybe it wasn't the most romantic of touches, but for Nico, this was the equivalent of making out in public. The boy wouldn't even give him a high five. The crouching behind a tree thing was getting kind of weird, so Mark formulated a plan to go and introduce himself, because he still wanted to meet Nico's secret boyfriend. And he was stupid. The more times this happened, the further he was leaning into the stupid category. His plan didn't really have time to formulate before he felt Nico's eyes on him.
Mark, stop stalking me.
He popped out from behind the tree and tried to look guilty. Nico didn't even look pissed anymore. A true testament to how consistently annoying Mark was. And the boyfriend looked more confused than anything. Nico narrowed his eyes at Mark's expression.
I don't know what convoluted theory you have right now, but Jason is not my boyfriend.
Fuck, he groaned. Nico was no fun. Of course he had known exactly what he was thinking, and now he was officially at another dead end. Maybe he was lying. He informed Nico of that idea, but he just shook his head.
We're literally not dating. You're just weird.
He decided to push, because that's who he was as a person.
I can feel the sexual tension from over here.
Jason looked horrified.
We're cousins.
Fuck. Of course they were related, because Nico had the biggest, least alike-looking family in existence. Seriously, it was getting ridiculous at this point. Nico rolled his eyes. He was honestly concerned that his eye might stay like that if he did it any more often.
We're barely cousins.
That didn't really make sense, but Nico said it with such conviction that he just went with it. Maybe the kid was Hazel's mom's adopted kid. At this point, nothing about the family could surprise him.
Well, this is awkward,
Mark finally said, hoping it would quench some of the tension in the air. It didn't work. Jason tilted his head at him.
Nico, is this your friend you were telling me about? You tell people about me?
He exclaimed. At the same time, Nico said,
Absolutely not.
Jason smirked.
Mark, right?
He fist pumped.
Yes, Mark.
The sentence didn't make a lot of sense. He was excited. Sue him. Nico intervened.
Now that we're all aware of your presence, get out, Mark. I am in the process of getting a new roommate.
He saluted awkwardly, knowing better than to protest. He was still riding the high of being acknowledged as Nico's friend.
See you around, Jason. Not you, Nico.
He sauntered off, hearing a loud,
"Fuck off,"
behind him. Damn, he was glad he was friends with that kid. Now just to find that fucking boyfriend. He had officially given up. Like, for real. There had been too many mistakes. Maybe there wasn't even a boyfriend. Because somehow he had met every member of Nico's extended family before he had ever gotten a glimpse of an apparent serious boyfriend. That's why, when he saw Nico sitting next to a blonde boy at a picnic table, he didn't even assume anything. He was probably his 12th cousin or something. Besides, Nico's type clearly wasn't nice boys. The whole Jason and Frank fiascos had definitely proven that. Or skaters. Or mechanics. So this puppy dog-looking boy was definitely not his boyfriend. He still went to introduce himself, because they were real friends now. Nico had met all of his friends. All 3. And actually approached him first in public. So long as he wasn't actively accusing family members of having sex with Nico, it was fair game. When Nico caught sight of him, he grinned and whispered something in the other boy's ear. The boy frowned, but when he caught Nico's expression, looked resigned. He wondered what Nico had said. Probably a warning. He wasn't sure if his level of awe still warranted a warning. It probably did. He cleared his throat and went over anyway. He gave an awkward little wave.
Hey, Nico. Hey, Nico's friend.
The boy smiled at him. His teeth were really white.
Will, nice to meet you.
Okay, so definitely not Nico's boyfriend. He knew that Nico didn't fuck with nice people. He had actually told him that.
What's up, Mark?
Nico finally asked, and he shrugged.
You know how it is. Just roaming campus looking for my best friend.
Nico cracked a smile, but still rolled his eyes.
What are you two up to?
Will looked like he wanted to say something, but Nico interrupted before he could speak.
I'm just helping Will study for his exam. He's a med student. Nico sounded weirdly proud of that. It was kind of odd. Nico didn't usually surround himself with sciencey kids, other than Mechanic Boy, who Nico seemed to tolerate more than anything. They were pretty much all English or history majors. So it was a little odd that he would be helping with something that was most definitely sciencey. Especially because there were no papers in front of them. He didn't question it, though. His questions never turned out to be right. Very cool, Mark said, drumming his fingers on the table. I was gonna be a doctor, but then I remembered I'm afraid of blood. Will nodded gravely. A dangerous problem. He paused for a second to think. To be fair, I think I'm scared of blood too. Nico smirked. Don't be modest, Dr. Solace. I've almost bled out in front of you a ton of times, and you didn't even blink. They both laughed at that, and Mark joined in hesitantly. Because what the fuck did that mean? Probably a weird figure of speech that he didn't know. He didn't sound like a figure of speech. Mark cleared his throat. I should probably get going. I gotta get to class and all that. He didn't have a class, but they were looking in each other's eyes, and it was starting to feel weird to interrupt their best friend time. He wondered how Nico's boyfriend felt about all the weirdly intimate relationships Nico had with other people. He was literally touching Will's hand as they sat next to each other. Mark probably would have been jealous of Will if he was dating Nico, but he didn't dare guess about their friend group's dynamics anymore. Besides, he was 90% sure Will and Nico were long-lost siblings or something. He seemed to have a lot of those. Will smiled at him softly, and Mark couldn't help but notice the way he was tracing circles on Nico's palm. Weirdly intimate for friends. It was nice to meet you, Mark. He gave an awkward salute. Any friend of Nico's is a friend of mine. Will looked a little guilty at that, and Nico smirked, which he definitely didn't get. But, again, not even going to try and guess. He had failed at analyzing people one too many times. We are definitely friends, Nico said matter-of-factly, staring at Will. Okay. Mark took a few steps backwards, before waving and turning away, leaving Will and Nico to stare at each other and apparently study for an exam. They were clearly such close friends that Mark was almost jealous. He snuck one look back, and now Nico was sticking his tongue down the other boy's throat. Mark's jaw dropped to the floor. Holy shit! And that is all for this fic. Oh, I love this one so much. It's just so funny. Literally, like, for my like 2 PODFIC list, I don't actually put the names of fics because I definitely forget the title. So I just put little short like blurbs that help me remember what it is. And for this fic, it's who's Nico's boyfriend? Not that one, not that. Just like ... It's just so, I love this fic. It's just so funny. It's perfect. I love it. Okay, and I said at the beginning this was for Mystery Box for the Scavenger Hunt challenge, and what that means is another team put together a list, and my team put together a list, and we swapped lists, and you have to be touching an item from that list to receive, like, points for the PODFIC to count as that challenge, and the one I am choosing on the list for this fic to meet the requirements is a physical, like, book from the piece of media, and I've got here The Sun and the Star. I haven't read this book yet. I got like a third of the way through when it came out, but I got the actual physical book for Christmas, so I'm gonna actually like sit down and read it properly. Stupid life stuff got in the way the first time, and also just me starting to be addicted to fan fiction. I've read like 5 books total since I got into fan fiction like 3 years ago or whatever. So, but now I'm gonna add this is gonna be another book I've read since that point. But yeah. Also, the audio for like the first 10 minutes or whatever for this podfic might be a little strange. I forgot to change the setting on my microphone from like taking 360 audio into consideration to just the like from the front kind of audio, because I was recording some like stuff on my kalimba. I've got to hear. So, and I feel like it picks up better when it's the full range, and I forgot to turn it back. Whoopsie. But I changed it back partway through. Also, I don't know how my accents were. I tried to, like, because this isn't like a show with everyone's voices where I know what they sound like, I don't have like reference stuff where I can listen to audio clips to try to imitate them. So I just like looked up like where they were from, and it's like, okay, the Hazel's from like New Orleans, I think it was, or something. So I looked up accents, and then like the Will is from Texas, so it's like, okay, I'll try for those 2 accents. I don't know how they came out though. I tried my best. It might not have sounded good. But anyway, that is all for this fic. As always, link to the fic is in the comments. Is in the description. You go leave a comment or a kudos for the original author. I'm sure they appreciate it. And that is all. I will see you guys next time.